Hello, everybody, and welcome to Geopolitics and Money. Excited to be with you as always. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hello, hello, hello.
How
We
are
have a
you?
very interesting topic
It
today.
is indeed. A lot of Americans have no clue as to
Mhm.
why there is this massive outflow of gold leaving the United States. So, in this
I'm
live
not even
stream,
sure they know that
yeah,
it's
most likely they don't.
leaving.
They don't. So in this live stream, we're gonna really delve deeper into really what's behind this massive flow of gold out of the U.S. We link it to the economic sort of big picture here in the U.S. and also link it to is this has to do with any foreign entities, countries, or what have you. So and well, I'm sure Elizabeth has some clips she's gonna share with us. With this is always nice
Well,
to have.
I always think it's important to visually also
Of
show
course,
what we're talking about.
yeah,
So, if you will allow me, David, I would like to add
of course.
so credit to wherever this came from. I don't know where this came from. I got it from Studious Stoic,
Well, we
but
give them credit. We give them
yes.
credit for that. But
So,
that is hilarious.
yeah.
and is
Currency wars, are we winning?
yeah, yeah, and is also really relaying a message that to me in a picture the message is loud and clear. This, for example, this fiasco about Venezuela, ain't
Mhm.
about Venezuela. It's about China. This
Right.
upcoming fiasco with Iran ain't about Iran. It is about China. It's the access to energy and so forth. Of course, to those who say, well, with Iran is the regime change and all that, but that's not a problem. Because I'm going to talk about that one tomorrow, guys, on the other channel. So I'm going to put the link for you for tomorrow. And this, since it is a geopolitical matter, it will be more for me to address it over there. But for now, here we're going to be talking about really why is gold leaving the U.S. in a record amount? And when you
Yes.
think about it, this is to me is significant because you have some sort of a combination of factors. This is not one item, the US debt and so forth. We're looking at, for example, the central bank buying a massive amount of gold. We're talking
Mhm.
about from other parts of the world because the increased demand, and that's because of the dollarization that is taking place. You talk also about the geopolitical tensions that exist.
Mhm.
As we mentioned earlier, Venezuela, now you have Iran, Russia, Ukraine, and other parts. And this is what makes in my opinion, and again, I am not a financial analyst, it's just my understanding of the big picture. This one makes sense to me as far as why now the demand for gold is more attractive because you also have a weaker US dollar.
Okay, so let's dive into a bunch of things that you just
Yeah.
said. So let's start out with this gold leaving. Okay,
Hmm.
so there's a couple of big reasons that this is important. The first is why did all of this gold? So there a whole bunch of gold came in January, and
Hmm.
then now an even larger amount is leaving. Now, first of all, this is gold bullion, right? So this is
Yeah.
non-monetary gold. This is straight up investment level gold, right? It's like the gold that's hypothetically in Fort Knox, right?
Yeah.
So this is asset class gold. So let's take a look at this chart. So this is where I initially actually learned a whole lot about what was happening here with the gold leaving the United States. So this is a tweet from Jim Rickards,
Hmm.
who I think is a very very interesting person. But he says the U.S. trade deficit went down. That's good for GDP. Okay, we'll dive into that in a second because it it doesn't really actually, and he, I mean, obviously he knows this, but this
Yeah.
doesn't actually really affect GDP. But a big part of the reason was huge gold exports. What
Mm.
does it say when gold is leaving the US in record amounts? Is the short term boost revealing a long term collapse? And then, so this is from the US Department of Commerce and Wells Fargo Economics. And so this is non monetary gold exports. And
Yeah.
as you can see up here, this is from 2010 all the way down here. Look at friggin' the end of 2025. Like, look at
You're right.
this.
You're right.
That's
Wow.
absolute insanity. So, I want to share a couple of other pieces of this. So, I want to share this. It is a nice Fred chart, which
Hmm.
I really appreciate because it is at least the like solid numbers the way that we know them. Okay, so this is imports of non-monetary gold and then exports of non-monetary gold over the last several years. Okay,
Hmm.
so as you can see, we imported and then exported a massive amount. So we imported a ton over here in 2020. And then
Uh-huh.
look at the imports over here in the beginning of 2025. So the beginning of 2025, what happened? A lot of importers were bringing gold in because they were afraid that gold was going to be affected by the tariffs. So a lot
Oh,
of
I
very
see.
smart people
Mhm.
were concerned about the tariffs. We saw the Walmarts of the world stockpile goods. We see here that
Mhm.
gold bullion was actually stockpiled. And then we also see down here towards the end, a whole bunch of it was re-exported. So that actually begs a really big question, is why is it now being re-exported versus staying here in the United States?
States. Yeah. Well, that's very, very interesting. And just to break it down, and again, to the level of, at least for me, my understanding of the link between what is going on and that geopolitical picture. So, if you are to think about, for example, what could be the drivers for the gold leaving the US?
Mhm.
In my opinion, would be two or three main elements that's going to sort of pops up right there, giving you the big picture. And the big picture is you start with the de-dollarization. So, and
Mhm.
this is again where you have the central bank trying to diversify. We're talking central bank, not just ours. This is where you have nations, especially when you think about emerging economies. What are they doing? They are buying significant amount of gold. And what
Mhm.
is that? It's because they want to reduce their reliance on the US dollar. And that will be driven by this amount of physical gold, out of the US vaults. This is why you're seeing this. So the other aspects you could consider is this is where we see the link between geopolitics and what's going on economically. The geopolitical uncertainty that exists in today's world, per se. You look in the what just took place in Venezuela. You look at now
Mhm.
Ukraine, Iran, and other places, and what this all have in common. What they all have in common is the demand for gold as a safe asset. You know,
Yes.
because this is where you have now global investors. They wanted seeking now to hold gold outside the US because they are seeing what they are coming. You think about, of course, for us domestically, the Federal Reserve. And
Mhm.
anytime you think of Federal Reserve, what do you think of? You think of interest rate. So, of
Yes.
course, lower interest rates is going to reduce the opportunity or cost of holding non-yielding, for example, gold. And that's what is going to make it appealing. And as we mentioned earlier, the weakness of the dollar, of course, a lot of people say, oh, this is no way. But the weaker dollar makes the gold cheaper for
Mhm.
holders of other currencies, not for us. This is where you see this boost of global demand come in. And of course, you add to this the US domestic political instability that exists without getting into more
Yeah.
detail. But the other aspect and the last point I want to talk about here is the market volatility. This
Mhm.
is very crucial because you think about what's going on with metals, what is going on with silver, what's going on with copper. All of this, in my opinion, reflects the investors' sort of flight to tangible assets because of the economic uncertainty. And if we know anything about history, we know that gold has always held its value or a store of value.
So you brought up silver, David, just now.
Yeah,
I want to share this chart also. So it turns out that during that exact same time period, it
hmm,
wasn't just gold that was imported and then subsequently exported. Take a
yeah,
look at this chart. So this chart is it's the same phenomena. So it was imported, You see up here where it was imported, and then you see down here where it was exported. So it was imported here at the beginning of 2025, just like the gold. And then
Mhm.
here it was exported the same as the gold
Mm,
also. So
mm.
it wasn't, you're absolutely right. It was not just gold, it was precious metals in general, gold
That's
and
correct.
silver that were both imported before the tariffs and then exported towards the end of the year.
Yeah. Well, this is where you're going to have the investors for the precious metals and silver and even gold. They are keeping an eye very, very open right now to
Mhm.
see how this is going to, manifest itself in the next few weeks or months. Add to this is the tension that exists between Donald Trump and Jerome Powell. Jerome
Mhm.
Powell is the chairman of the Federal Reserve. So, of
Mhm.
course, this has the war against the independence of the Federal Reserve. And just because, like we always say, and I remember you saying this, Elizabeth, so many times,
Mhm.
that market doesn't like uncertainty,
Yep.
because just this tension between Donald Trump and Jerome Powell has sent some sort of gold and silver prices to a new high. Of course, recently the gold dropped, just
Mhm.
recently, but in my opinion, this isn't about Donald Trump. It is about also the historical trend that I believe many other empires went through.
Absolutely.
So that is to me where the issue is. And if you want me just elaborate briefly
Go
here, and I'll
ahead, go
turn it
ahead.
over to you.
You're
This
on
has
a
to
roll,
do,
David.
yeah.
Rock
We
it.
go back to 15th century. Who was the main dominating force in the 15th century? The Spaniard.
Mhm.
So under Philip II, King Philip II at that time. So what happened? Once the Spanish sort of conquered so many parts of the world, how they did that?
Mhm.
Based on that, because when you acquire territories, you have to fund it. So all of a sudden, those who knew how to read the financial landscape start to realize this is not sustainable. So what you start to
Mhm.
have towards the end of the 15th century is the outflow of gold from Spain to where? It went to Dutch.
Mhm.
That's why the Dutch in the 16th century were massive. This is where some sort of expanded all over the world. This is where you have Amsterdam back then became a central for trade, economy, trade, investments, and so forth. Why? Because of gold. And of course,
Mhm.
when you think about the history of the Dutch from Indonesia all the way to South Africa and anything in between, how they did that? Because they had to borrow money and so forth. The same thing, this kind of approach was unsustainable till we turned over to 17th century. What happened? The
Mhm.
British, the British Empire, like you always say, when you hear an independence of a country, independence from whom?
The British,
From
right?
British. So of course, what the British end up doing, sort of conquering all over the world and all that. How is that going to be sustained? It's going to have to borrow money. As a matter of fact, they were asking for the US. The gold played a role into this till you start to see, especially in the turn of the 19th century, 1910, I think, forward, when the Germans start to push production,
Mhm.
you start to see the outflow of gold. Where did this gold went? It came to New York.
Mhm.
And that's my point into all this. Once you reach a certain level of where you can sustain this expansion, which is exactly where we are, I'm talking about our country here, that's where we are expanding beyond what we can sustain. And of course, what you're going to start to notice, to those who know how to read the balance sheets, you start
Mhm.
to see the outflow of the gold, and that is exactly what we're experiencing.
Yeah, so all of that that's also my understanding very much, is that
Yeah,
at the very end of every single cycle, and Spain is a fantastic one. All of
indeed,
them are fantastic ones. You can see it
indeed.
with Great Britain before
Yeah,
before the United States, is that everyone is sort of engaged in number one, foreign
mhm.
wars. Very expensive foreign wars.
Indeed, indeed.
What is the US involved in pretty much nonstop right now? Foreign wars.
Foreign
And
wars, yeah.
you're seeing it with Venezuela right now, you're seeing it with
Iran,
Ukraine, Iran, you're seeing it
Iran.
all over the
Yeah,
place, right? Wars that were supposed to take what, 1, 2 months or not happen at all And all of a sudden, escalation, nonstop escalation, nonstop escalation. And it's not as explosive as like, oh, okay, it's about to hit nuclear war, even though they'll like say that it threatens that. But the
Yeah.
point isn't to obliterate the planet. The point is to ensure the flow of money.
Money.
Because what is it? A lot of people say this, but I think Gerald Celente said it like recently, right?
Yeah.
So when the country's broke, what do? Send you to
They
war.
take you to war.
They take you to war.
When everything else
Mhm.
failed, they take
Mhm.
you to
They
war.
take you to
He's
war.
right. He was right. So, and that is exactly the point for this, because for us, just for you to understand on a, even on a basic level, because that's to me, if you have the basic understanding, at least you understand where the dynamics are headed, it gives you an idea of what to expect, to the best of your abilities. So when you think about the gold outflow from the US or any country,
Mhm.
because go back to Spain, 16th century, the Dutch, 17th and 19th century with England, and now the US. When you think about this under this so-called historical standard, because you have to put this under historical lenses to have a
Mhm.
better understanding. And that's usually what signifies, at least based on what I read, it signifies that this balance of payments deficits, when you start seeing the outflow of gold massive amount, which
Mhm.
means what does it mean, this simple balance payments deficit? It's simple. What it means that spending and importing are more than earning and exporting.
Mhm.
So which means what again? It leads to reduce or reduction of money supply. And if you do that, it's going to lower the domestic prices, increase export competitiveness, and a potential self-correction that you're going to have to embark on, which is a policy, mechanism to balance out this trade. This is where the issues, because the big problem with all this, it's one of the major aspects, and that major aspect is the loss of confidence in an economy. And that in
Yeah.
itself will weaken the currency. This is why you are seeing so many countries are sort of demanding gold, because they are seeing something's coming with the US economy.
Well, so I want to put this back up here, David, and
Mhm.
talk about what you're basically talking about right now, because this
Yeah,
this image, credit to whoever made it. Like I said,
yeah,
credit to whoever made it. This is really, really funny. But the reality is, with this massive outflow of gold, and I want to talk a little bit later actually about the fact that in so I'll just share this because I think it's particularly interesting. In 2015, there were 293 ounces of paper gold claims for every 1 ounce of actual physical gold. So
mhm,
it was 293 ounces of paper claims like, hey, I own this gold. This piece of paper
yeah,
that says, I own this gold, right? For
yeah,
every 1 ounce of actual gold that there was. And so there's actually a whole underside to this where it's a lot of people don't physically have the gold in their
yeah,
hand, right? That's
yeah,
what's supposed to be in Fort Knox. That's what's in the Fed vaults. It's gold that has been leased out or has been oversold by many, many
by
times.
many.
So
Yeah,
this is a lot more complicated than physical gold, because physical gold is hard to secure, it's hard to hold on to, you can't carry it around. And so
yeah,
you've got a lot of more or less IOUs, or paper statements, or leased gold that's going around. So it's a little bit more complicated than just like, hey, we have a bar of gold and like, we're shipping
yeah,
it, over. Though that is happening. So I want to share this because it's really important to look at the fact that the gold is the thing that the United States should have held on to no matter what,
yeah.
because it's being exported, which means it is being traded for what? Dollars.
Dollars.
The
Mm.
problem with dollars is that we have a lot of those and we can print them. The United States can print however many dollars it wants. Now, granted, that's become a huge problem, but
Yeah,
it can and has printed an enormous amount of money. I have a chart actually somewhere I'll show a little bit later, but I think it's like 85% of all the dollars that have ever existed have been printed in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So dollars are something that the United States actually doesn't need, but gold is something that the United States does need. So
Yeah.
why is it that the United States is trading the thing that it needs for something that it absolutely, more or less, to the government, dollars are worthless because they can print it? So it's something very serious to be paying attention to, is why is the US letting go of the thing that it needs in return for something it flat out can just print? Why is that happening? And who is it going to? So we know who it's going to.
Yeah. Well, this is why you have, for example, to my knowledge, BlackRock has moved out of the country about $2.3 trillion out of the country. Out of the country. That tells you something is going on regarding these aspects. And when you think about, since we're talking about gold here, I mean, if you are to tie it to, for example, as an example, trade deficits. So you think about the primary reason is for the gold outflow is linked to the trade deficits. That's usually where a country, let's say in our example, the US, buys more goods from abroad than it sells. So how are they going to be paying for the difference? They're going to be paying for the difference by through gold. This is, again, when you think about the idea of the reduced money supply. Gold leaving a country, be it the US or whatever other country, means what? Means that less backing now for its currency.
Right.
And that in itself will shrink the money supply. And this is, again, where you have these issues of, are we looking at a deflation here when a smaller money supply leads to lower domestic prices? Give or take.
So, okay. So the answer, I think, is no. And I have a couple of reasons for that. All right. So let's take a look at exactly what you're talking about for a second. So this article is freaking hilarious. Tariffs are working? ? Reducing the export-import gap was the main motivation behind the tariffs. Okay. That's what Trump said. That and bringing manufacturing back to the United States, which has absolutely not happened. So, like, objectively, there have been a couple of wins in terms of bringing some manufacturing back, but for the most part, both manufacturing, the manufacturing sectors are stagnant. So that unfortunately, because I think it would be great to bring it back, but unfortunately, more or less hasn't happened. With tariff whiplash causing trade balance fluctuations last year, the trade deficit from January to October was still 7.7% higher than a year prior. Okay, well, so objectively, it's still not working. The month-to-month contraction in October was largely due to a swing in a handful of products. Surging gold shipments abroad accounted for nearly 90% in the rise of exports.
Yeah.
Okay, the rest. Go ahead, David.
I was going to say, and that is exactly the point. When this kind of economic instability persists, this is where you have this kind of what we are experiencing, the persistent deficits that exist. These deficits are persistent no matter what the government said. Of course, I don't trust what the government is saying anyway. So, and this is where you have the persistent deficits on one hand, then you have the gold drains on the other, like exactly what we are experiencing. And this, in my opinion, will signal one particular aspect, and that aspect is the weakening of the currency. That is, to me, which require, again, some sort of a fiscal policy change of direction, whatever. And again, that ties to the issue of the tariffs. That's when we went ahead and imposed tariffs right and left and so forth. We didn't see the big picture. And this is where some will argue, and I couldn't agree more, that the US might end up taking the shortcuts. What do I mean by this? Printing money. So buying gold but printing money, which is not some sort of cutting shortcuts here.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, and let me speak to that really quick, David, because
Yeah.
this is a very important piece of information. Okay, so what you're looking at here is a Trump social post. So I want to speak to what you're talking about between Jerome Powell and President Trump, because they have a very, very prolific,
I know.
very, very epic battle going on, basically. And Jerome Powell obviously is going to leave as Fed chair, and Trump is trying to get Scott Bessent, and we'll see who actually ends up as Fed chair. But quantitative tightening ended
Yeah.
towards the end of last year. Quantitative tightening ended. So the Fed stopped that. But what we're looking at right now is we're looking at a very interesting play by President Trump uh, to basically print money in different ways. Okay, other than just like the money printer go burr, right? And
Yeah.
money is printed. It's not actually printed, right? It's like numbers on a screen, but
Yeah.
there are other ways that money can be created other than that. So we're looking at a Truth Social post from a couple of days ago. And this is a way to create money that is
Mhm.
not the money printer go burr. Okay. So this is he says a lot of things here, but I want to point to this. Okay. Because all right, let's see. Okay. Everything was broken, but President of the United States, have already fixed
Of
it.
course.
Oh, okay, good. That's neat.
That's
Good
Donald
job. Good
Trump
job.
for you. Yeah.
That's sarcasm, guys. In case you didn't catch it, sarcasm. Okay. Now I'm giving special attention to the housing market. Okay, so pay attention to this because this is actually a really big deal. Now, I'm giving special attention to the housing market because I choose not to sell Fannie Mae and chose not to sell Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in my first term. A truly Here, let me see if I can highlight this whole thing. A truly great decision. Okay. And
Mhm.
against the advice of the experts, it's now worth many times that amount. An absolute fortune, and has $200 billion in cash. Okay. Now here's the linchpin here. Because of this, I am instructing my representatives to buy $200 billion in mortgage bonds.
Wow.
Okay. So this will drive down mortgage rates, monthly payments rate, and the cost of owning a house it will be more affordable, so he says.
Yeah.
Okay, so why is that really important? Because David, you were talking about tightening the money supply. Okay, so the
Mhm.
central banks can tighten money supply at will, and they can also loosen money supply at will. Because Trump and Jerome Powell are having an argument basically between each other, the Trump administration is finding ways basically to loosen the money supply, which
Yeah.
creating more money, loosening the money supply in the various different ways that it's happening is what is causing inflation. So, we have the like, oh, well, inflation's only at 3% according to the Fed, right? So it's only at 3%. But when you go to the freaking grocery store, your groceries are like exuberantly priced. Everything is way more
Yeah.
expensive. And so the reality is that this is not in real actual life. If it were
Yeah.
only 3%, people wouldn't be struggling, right? So what we're looking at is the Fed couldn't fix the problem because bank lending wasn't the problem. Bank
No.
lending isn't how we got to the inflation level that we're at. The problem was that we created an enormous amount of money in the last 5 years. And then we're wildly encouraged to spend it. And then
Yeah.
we're encouraged to take out loans on top of it.
Yeah.
And so we have so much money supply because of various forms of quantitative easing, money printing. And so the government can and will continue to do that. And that's what's happening. And that's why it's this like massive shock to me that they would let any of that freaking gold get out of this country.
Country, yeah. And if Trump is talking about driving the mortgage rate down, then he should look into the scams that's going on through the H-1B visas. That
Yeah.
most of those individuals are getting a different interest rate on the mortgage. I'm finding out right here in the state of Texas.
Mhm.
You won't believe the amount of scammers regarding the H-1B visa. And this is why when the government decide, oh, we're going to stop visas for 75 countries. You know, one of the countries is not included in the 75?
What?
Is India. India is not included. And this is where
Yeah.
the whole issue is. As a matter of fact, find out that a lawyer right here in the state of Texas issued over 220,000 H-1B
Whoa.
visas. Yeah, a lawyer here in the state of
Wow.
Texas. He's in India, from India. And another guy is an American who is advising Donald Trump or the White House on behalf of India after he received $1.8 million from the Indian government.
Wow.
And makes you just wonder, wait a minute. I looked at the list, by the way. I looked at the list of those countries. India is not included. And I'm like, something is fundamentally wrong with this picture. And again, to me, it's the idea of why will an H-1B visa holder end up having an interest rate for a mortgage that is far lower than us average Americans who've been paying the full interest rate amount. And that's, to me, it's not right. And I will not stay silent about this one. You know, shame on our governor, by the way. Even Governor Abbott himself is pathetic and incompetent, and he needs to step down forever. That's the way I see it. So just to go back to that point where you had on the Truth Social post
let me
about
put it
the
back.
mortgage rates, that's one of the issues, and it's not even addressed. Yeah, if you are to drive the mortgage rate down, let's get to the bottom of it. And this takes me back to the fiat currency, since we're talking about gold and so forth. When you have this now loss of confidence, the loss of confidence, one of the signs for that is when you start to see a significant outflow of gold. And that suggests, in my opinion, this is the idea of the reduced confidence in a country's economy, policies, and even the currency for that matter. This is where we are as far as where our economy is. And for an average American, this is why, if you think about, do you know, by the way, do you know where the, if you want to remove that one?
Oh, yeah, here.
Yeah.
Got it? Sorry. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
Did it work?
If you ask yourself, where is the Prime Minister of Canada right now? Does anybody know?
I don't know. Where is he?
He's in China.
Oh.
He is in China. Makes you think. Just think again about the idea. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this about the economic drain that, of course, Canada has been also experiencing, and they are realizing you cannot depend on the US because of where the conditions are economically and politically are, which is a mess anyway. So what are you going to turn? You're going to turn to a country that has amassed massive amount of gold. A lot of people do not know what China's been doing for the past year. Is amassing about or restructuring about $8 trillion worth of assets. So this is why China's been working for years on amassing massive amount of gold. Do you know what they see coming? They've been dumping the US bonds or treasuries and so forth, because to them, they see where this is going. And this is where you start to have this so-called capital flight, where the investors, or even you in this case, citizen, might end up moving your wealth out of a country to some other country where it is safer for you. And that's the idea. We're talking about investors that move massive amount of money. We're not talking you and I, we're just average people. We cannot. I mean, even if we want to open an account in Switzerland, which I looked into, this requires a minimum of $10,000 to open an account in Switzerland. So that's just my point in all this. We have to understand where these dynamics, because in essence, the gold outflow, when it starts to go, that's usually a sign or points to the economic inefficiencies and the imbalances that exist. And this is where you have to start to say to yourself, is the country going to embark, in this case, our country, will it embark on a sound fiscal policies to remedy this? So, because as we all know throughout history, gold has been and it will always be a financial safety assets. It's always going to be.
Absolutely. Okay, before I share this, David, because I wanted to find what you're speaking to.
Yeah.
I have it, so I wanted to share it. But guys, if you have questions, put the word question in there and we'll take some questions. Okay. So I wanted to share this, David, because Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent came out, this was, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, or less than a week ago, maybe, reveals up to 10% of the US budget is actually fraud. It's actually stolen.
Wow.
And that is a shocking amount. 10% of the US budget would go an enormous way to rebuilding infrastructure here in the United States. It would go towards paying off the debt. It would go towards reducing our debt, quite frankly. So that's a massive amount of money. So, I mean, the Treasury Secretary came out and said that up to 10% of the US budget is stolen every year. That's hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, that is not including the Pentagon, who failed their audit, I think, for the 7th time. I think the Pentagon will never, ever succeed an audit. But I just wanted to share that because it's not a small sum. You know, when we're looking at what's happening in Minnesota, we're seeing we're seeing a large amount of money, but it's not, it's up to, I guess, $12 billion, which for Minnesotans would go a very long way. I mean, that's people who wouldn't, freeze to death or starve to death, right? That's taking care of some of the most vulnerable or the most vulnerable populations in that state. But if you look at it countrywide, that level of debt, and this is China, I guarantee, does not have 10%, right, in fraud. I think because of the way, and like, this is not China good, US bad. This is when Evergrande went bankrupt, when they went under, their CEO was held accountable for that. And here in the United States, when there is massive fraud, no one is held accountable. When the big banks failed, when they made terrible investments, and the government, the taxpayers bailed them out, and it was supposed to be repaid, blah, 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 never happened. Executives got giant bonuses and everybody else was left holding the bag, right? So the United States doesn't do a very good job. In fact, they do the worst job, or one of the worst jobs, for a freaking world leader country, does an absolute abysmal job dealing with fraud. And in fact, in my opinion, I said this last time too, in my opinion, there is no way the government was not complicit in some way in what was in the fraud that was taking place, and in the fraud that's taking place here. If you are giving some random company millions of dollars and not doing any checks whatsoever, not checking to see if they're legitimate, not checking to see if they actually have kids at their daycare, not checking to see if they're actually feeding people, that is on the government. So even if that is the base layer of corruption that's happening in the government, is that they're just throwing money at random people and not checking, that in itself is unacceptable, much less perhaps being actually involved.
Indeed. And you know how I will deal with that?
I do know.
I'm not going to say it. I'm going to just share a picture.
No, don't. David, you can't do that.
Why not?
I don't want to get our channel deleted.
I did it on the other channel because I believe in that. But that's me. That's me, is the idea. Yes, you're absolutely correct. It's because there is no accountability in the system. There is no, and that's why nothing's going to change. Trump or not, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The political system, it's not an individual. It's the system that is corrupted to its core.
Yeah.
You can replace all you want till the system is fixed. I don't see what else is going to change. And this is where you put the picture into the big picture of, for example, what just took in Venezuela. And one of the key questions, and I remember I asked the community about this. I don't recall the numbers. Actually, I can put it up here. Let me hold on a second. I'm going to get it out quickly here.
Yeah.
It's because I asked one of the questions, And the key question was about the gold. So the gold in Venezuela. Let me
Oh
see
yeah,
here.
the goal,
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean,
because
go ahead, go ahead, go
yeah,
ahead.
because it's worth asking that question.
Mhm.
Because what's going to happen to that gold? Who's going to control the gold now in England that
Mhm.
belongs to Venezuela, by the way?
Mhm.
So, and to me, it was a logical question to ask. Uh, I'm trying to locate this particular survey that I put for the community. Not this one here. Okay, I have one more.
Oh, here, I'll share this while
Okay, yeah,
you're
go ahead.
talking. So this is I wanted to share this with you guys earlier because it's really important. That's the amount of money that's been created, dollars, US dollars. So as you can see, what happened here in 2020?
Yeah,
Okay, I mean, guys, like seriously consider this. This is in billions of dollars. This is the amount of money that has been created over since it started recording all the way up through, not since it started recording, but since it looks like the 19 like 70s ish, all
yeah,
the way up through to today. And there is, I mean, even like you see these like teeny tiny little spikes up here, and then
yeah,
it's growing and it's growing, and we have a little bit more money, a little bit more money. And then look at the freaking COVID years.
yeah.
And since the COVID years, you can't have this much money printed this quickly and
Quickly, yeah,
not have consequences.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't understand. And at the time, David, do you remember there were so many smart economists that were looking at the money printing that was happening, and they
Mhm.
were like, guys, this is a bad idea. You need to open the world back up. You need to open the country back up, and you can't keep printing money like this. It's
Yeah.
going to turn into massive inflation because not only did we print this money, right? But we
Mhm.
printed this money while also borrowing an enormous
Bottom
amount of
line,
money.
yeah, yeah.
And so while there's a large contingent of people, and I'm one of them, who
Mhm.
believes that the gold reserves, which the dollar is, the US dollar, any fiat currency is only backed by the trust in the government that prints it, right? It's
Yeah,
it's not backed by anything. But when the United States has low levels of assets, they don't it's like asking for a default. The problem with a default is that it throws the entire world into chaos because of how prevalent the dollar still is and how many economies are still tied to the US dollar. So this is a massive problem, not just for the United States. It's a massive problem for every country whose currency is tied to the US dollar, which is a lot. They're trying to get away from it right now, and they're
yeah,
trying to go towards the yuan and gold and other safe assets. But right now, like, this is a massive problem. And the smart people at the time were like, don't print this much money.
yeah,
Don't do this. And alas, they did it anyway. And here's where we are. So I
yeah,
just wanted to share that because it's really important.
yeah. Here, I found the that survey when I asked the
Mhm.
question as to who's going to be controlling Venezuela's gold reserves in London.
Yeah.
26% said the UK, 48% said the US, and 26% said don't know, which
Mhm.
logical answer too, because
Yeah.
people don't know. But just it gives you an idea as to really what's behind now. You think in terms of these ventures the United States
Mhm.
is embarking on. We start with Venezuela, then you think about Iran. Most of them are in the case of Venezuela, it's a massive oil producer, over 303 billion barrel of oils. Its reserves
Mhm.
far exceeds that of Saudi Arabia. Saudi
Yep.
Arabia, it's I think about 286, even though it's not confirmed. The
Mhm.
Saudis never wanted to disclose that, and the U.S. government has been trying for years 40 years to know the exact figure.
It's a little bit sus, don't you
Uh,
think?
say it again.
It's a little suspicious.
It is because the Saudis they holding this so close to their chest, per
Mhm.
se. And when I was in Saudi Arabia, I talked to some people and they said, "Yeah, this info will never." Because remember, who controls the oil? is Aramco. What is Aramco?
Mhm.
Is the royal family company. Aramco is not Aramco is the Saudi company. So,
Mm.
my point in all this, because you think also the Saudis have so much gold in the U.S. This is where their fear is they don't want to cross the US because the fear of that the US will freeze their gold here.
Yeah.
And now in the case of Venezuela, the US has already mentioned that it's going to open up an account in the name of Venezuela where
Mhm.
the oil revenues will be held. It's going to be in the Bank of New York. It's the same process we've done for Iraq.
Mhm.
Even till today, Iraq's oil revenues are not going directly to Iraq. They come into New York, and we disperse the money to Iraq, which to me doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You only do this for two reasons. One is to control the oil revenues as far as what that country gets, and second, to dictate the policies and the term to that government. So,
Mhm.
and this is again, in my opinion, this wasn't like in the case of Venezuela, wasn't about Venezuela. It was about China. Because when you
Oh,
know,
absolutely, unquestionably. Yeah.
yeah. And I just did an analysis for someone
Mhm.
regarding this particular issue is because to China now is going to have to change its calculus regarding Latin America. Why? Because Venezuela was the only country that is providing both diplomatic and economic footprints
Mhm.
for China in Latin America. We cut off that. As of today, China's access to that is done for, at
Mhm.
least in that part of the world. But China also invested so much in Venezuela.
Yeah.
Yeah, a
Oh,
lot of
yeah,
people.
absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of people do not know how much China invested into all this. China invested almost 120 billion dollars into Venezuela.
Well,
China still owe Venezuela, or Venezuela owes China about $20 billion, and
mhm.
that's why it goes through the oil. So for me,
Right.
it was a strategic move on our part to cut off China. It's not about Venezuela; it's about China.
Oh, like unquestionably, that's true.
Yeah,
When you look at so Venezuela was very uniquely poised for something like this to
yeah,
happen, right? And you're number one correct, absolutely correct that Venezuela has the largest proven
yeah.
oil reserve in the world. And not only that, it is that heavy crude. So it has the processing plants
Hmm,
on
hmm.
the sort of coast and the of the US. They process heavy crude. So it is the appropriate type of oil for the refineries that we have here that
Yeah.
are close enough to it to matter. But you're absolutely right. Almost 100% of their oil was going to China in repayment for the
That's correct.
infrastructure that
Yeah,
was now granted. Venezuela requires an enormous amount more infrastructure, right? This is billions if not trillions more infrastructure to be able to pull that the rest of that oil out of the ground. But
yeah.
what they were pulling out of the ground was going to China, straight up.
Well,
China
so
is
far, yeah, so far you have about 300 to 470,000 barrel a day that is
Mhm.
going from Venezuela to China.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
what.
they were the hands down.
So
They were absolutely the largest. It
yeah,
was an investment in yuan. I mean, it was the whole shebang. But on top of that, Latin America's largest trading partner overall, and it's
mm,
not just Venezuela. You're looking at
yeah,
Brazil, you're looking at a lot of Latin America. Their largest trading partner was China and not the United States. The
yeah.
problem with that is that the United States doesn't have anything to trade, not nothing. The United States has some things to trade, but compared to China, they don't have they what do we have in the United States that Latin America wants?
Probably weapons.
But you can
Yeah,
only weapons can only go so freaking far,
that's
especially
true.
if you're not at war. You have to be at war for weapons
Yeah,
to be something that you want a ton
yeah,
of, right?
yeah,
But China has manufacturing in all sectors. They have tech manufacturing, they have clothing, they have food, they have all kinds of products
yeah,
for the rest of the world to buy.
yeah,
And you brought this up earlier, David. if Donald Trump wanted manufacturing to come back to the United States,
Yeah.
some infrastructure built up for that to happen
Yeah.
would probably been a good thing to do
Mm.
first before tariffs.
Well, this is why I think he miscalculated. I believe Donald Trump miscalculated on this. He overestimated his ability that he's going to dictate the term to the U.S. Oil executives, because
Oh yeah.
so far this saying no, we're not going to go, and rightly so, because they're not going to go. They realize that oil is already cheap on the global market. It's
Yeah.
not going to justify the billions of dollars. And second, even if you invest this, it's going to take years before that oil start to flow
Yes.
around the world. So to China, at least from the perspective of China, that's what I'm saying. And I've argued this before, even when the tensions start to rise. I said back then, and it's on the record, I said this has nothing to do with Venezuela, it has to do with China, because China invests heavily in Venezuela. You're looking at about $106 billion for $160 billion in loans that the Chinese have provided Venezuela. And Venezuela, as I mentioned earlier, owes China about $20 billion in unfulfilled oil supply.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
it
that's
had an interruption.
Yeah. So, and to me, this is why the US looked at it from a strategic perspective. Oh, we don't want Chinese in the Western Hemisphere, because Venezuela was one of China's closest political and economic sort of partner in Latin America. And this is what gives China foothold in Latin America. So, and this is why to China, this is it's going to be a major loss, depending on how they're going to proceed with this and deal with that. So it's not going to be some sort of an economic disaster. No, it won't, because when you consider, despite this amount of oil China imports from Venezuela, it only counts for 4%.
Right. It's
4%.
not a lot. It's not a lot.
But when you think about what the US is planning on doing with Iran, makes you just put the two together and figure, oh, this might not be a sort of smart move for China to invest so much in one. This is for China's going to have to think very hard moving forward, is to these dynamics, what's going on, to ensure that its investment, it gets return on its investments. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is very clearly, like, they talk about political theater, right? And the politics being a game of chess, more or less. This was a chess move. Now, it's a chess move with human beings, but it's a chess move, right? The United States didn't want China to gain control over the largest proven oil reserve in the world, okay? And China was gaining a very strong foothold in that. And so the United States played chess, and I don't know if you guys have ever played chess, but it's a fairly violent game, right? You're taking out each other's pieces. This isn't like, oh, you're snuggling them and, whatever, giving them cake. Like, you're taking out each other's pieces. And so this is very, very clearly a chess move from the United States and China for Venezuela. But at the same time, the United States, that may have, first of all, I think that it was the wrong move, because violating the sovereignty of a country over oil, my personal opinion is that opens up a whole can of worms later, and that's not the thing you should do. Okay.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it strategically, if you're looking at it without being a human at all, like if you shut off all of your humanity and you look at it just as a move, the United States is grasping at straws right now. Like, this wasn't even, with 9/11, or not 9/11, sorry, with the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, at least there was like a whole lie campaign around it, right? There was like a whole thing and everybody believed it. And it was like such a big, very few people, I think, buy the, like, this was about fentanyl. I don't think
Yeah.
people buy that because it's so obvious that it's absolutely not about that. Now, fentanyl is bad and terrible and should be absolutely obliterated from the world, but that's not about it regardless.
Yeah.
And so, on one hand, the United States is trying to secure its position. And on another hand, it's exporting gold, which is the one freaking thing it should actually have.
Yeah.
The monetary policy right now, or the United States financial policy is freaking insane. Donald Trump, if his administration didn't understand that it was going to take a really long time to get manufacturing back to the United States and that tariffs were just going to piss off other countries, if his administration didn't understand that, and we freaking understood it, if like every intelligent economist took a look at it and said, hey dude, this you literally can't bring manufacturing back this quickly for these reasons. And if a freaking presidential if a presidential cabinet didn't know that, if Scott Besson didn't know that, I think he's a pretty smart dude. I don't necessarily like him, but he's a pretty freaking smart dude. If he didn't know that ahead of time, so you can't tell me that nobody in the freaking Trump administration saw this coming. And if they did they not tell him? What happened here? And if you're an American, you should be freaking pissed off. Because what's happening right now was predictable many decades ago, right? And every politician, including this administration, has been kicking that freaking can down the road. Well, okay, the can is here and you can't kick it down any further. What are you going to freaking do? So I don't know. I think people should be pissed off at the Trump administration right now for handling this so freaking poorly. They didn't see that this was what was coming.
No.
The Biden administration didn't see that printing that much freaking money was going to lead to inflation. He didn't see that.
Yeah.
Anyone with half a brain could see that.
If they have a brain.
And I know that he unfortunately seems to have some kind of dementia or something was going on with him, but he has an entire staff of people. Guys, this is not freaking rocket science. Like anybody could see that this is what was going to happen, and yet they keep doing it.
That's when you realize the advisors and politicians are not serving the constituents. So that's what I'm saying again. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying this is the system. No matter who you put there, the system is flawed.
I know.
That's where the issue is. We can, they keep changing the whomever. No, the system is corrupted.
I know.
The system itself. Till we deal with it the right way, and you know how to deal with corruption. You start weeding out. It's going to take time, of course.
There's no one to deal with it, right? So if everyone in power is somehow seems to freaking be in on it, who's going to deal with it?
Then you are left with one option.
Who's going to freaking deal with it? And I think that the only option is for Americans to actually pay attention to what's happening, not the like shiny things or the fact that there's like 10 million distractions going on.
Yeah. But the Americans need to take a stand. They need to take a stand. This is not about just understanding. You have to take action. Simple as that. No, of course, but we all know where it will lead to. That is where the concern is.
The thing is, David, when people voted for Donald Trump, what did he run on? Draining the swamp, right? He ran on draining the swamp. Not only is the swamp not drained, okay, it's not drained, guys. Swamp's not drained. Not only is it not drained, but we're starting to see how deep the swamp actually is. And like, I mean, I give a lot of respect to Nick Shirley, man, because that's a 23-year-old kid who went and saw like, hey, there's no kids at this daycare center, but it's getting millions of dollars. Okay, news media, where were you?
Well, it's because it was also the previous administration that facilitated all that stuff. This is not, we gotta be fair, and I'm that type. This is not a Donald Trump's problem to begin with at the beginning.
No, that's on the state level. That one,
we're
that
gonna
one
have
was on
to
the state
go back.
level,
We have to go back to the previous administration that facilitated these kind of transactions. You look at the immigration aspects of it. What did the previous administration did? What did the previous administration do at that time? Open up the border for immigrations? No, we don't know who's coming to the country. How do you think this H-1B visa just sort of exploded into? The previous administration had its share of all this. Where Trump's issue is the people surrounding him to understand, and this is where again is the system that is flawed. The system is corrupted.
Absolutely.
So most Americans will be upset and all that. That's not going to do a thing till Americans take stand, and we start seeing it right here instead of Texas. I am watching what's going on the statements on social media regarding what Greg Abbott, our so-called governor, is doing with these Indian communities. So that is a big problem. Big problem. So that's why now you have calls coming up. Maybe it's time for him to get out, and he's been too long in the office. That's again because I believe, and this is me talking. I believe the next 15 years, you're gonna see a different face in America. America will have a different face. Now you can understand this anywhere you are. Ask people in Canada, in Toronto, they'll tell you.
Well, so an interesting thing that you're bringing up, David, because if you're looking at, so I looked at like who is the bulk of who's paying taxes in the United States, because outside of money printing, which we've done, and outside of borrowing, the way that the United States makes its money is from its people paying taxes. Okay. So the majority of the people who actually pay taxes are the Christian white American. The Christian white American pays about 60% of all taxes. And then it goes down substantially from there. So the entire rest of every other type of group here pays substantially less and less and less taxes. So there is a very interesting dynamic that's happening right now with the different groups of people and what they are contributing to the United States as a whole. So if the top group of people gets particularly disillusioned and decides they're interested in some perhaps very right tax reforms, where is the money going to come from for the United States, right? It can't print it because that's not productive money. When you print money, it's not productive. It doesn't create anything. It doesn't produce anything. And so that's why you've got a whole bunch of non-productive money. And according to the, I think it's the Census Bureau, don't quote me on that, but 33% of American households have no income at all. And that's including, people who have retired. But it's also including people who are on welfare, people who are on programs. But that's 33%. That's 1/3 of all American households have no income, which means they are not currently producing anything for the economy. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, right? And I'm not necessarily, especially not blaming necessarily the lower classes for being poor, because there's a lot of reasons for that, a whole lot. And I also want to bring this up, David, because this is really, really important with immigration, especially with Latin American immigration. Okay. Because like you said, it's coming from everywhere, but Latin American immigration has historically been sort of the bulk of the immigration into the United States. When you look back at a lot of the past presidents and a lot of the past presidential policies, including putting sanctions on Venezuela, okay, which is a fairly recent, right? Including those sanctions, what did that do to the Venezuelan economy? It fucking sorry, I don't know if I can say on YouTube, but it cratered their economy. Okay. Now, who did that? The United States freaking did that. And then, so it's more or less creating like a permanent underclass in Latin America through policies, through financial policies. And what was it? I think it was Nixon that was caught. It was Nixon or Reagan. I get them mixed up because they're both, little shady dudes. Okay. But I get them mixed up. but we played it on one of the shows where it was like make the economy of Chile scream.
Yeah.
Those are human beings. Those are people. Those are real people. And so what, you freaking tank their economy and expect them to not want to go somewhere else where
Yeah.
their economy isn't rigged? So the United States is playing a role in how Latin America has more or less developed or not developed, putting them under these IMF loans that a lot of them are still paying off from the freaking 80s
Yeah.
and 90s.
Argentina is the.
Argentina is
I'm very
right.
familiar with the loan they got back in 1986. I'm very familiar with it.
1986.
Yes.
What did they get for that loan?
Nothing.
And what they got, was it worth the next 40 years of paying on it instead of having that money to reinvest back into their own country? So the United States is absolutely culpable for what's happening to the Latin American countries. The United States, it is unquestionable that they have committed, I'm not going to say the word that I want to say, but they have not been kind to the economies of Latin America. And then what, they expect those people to just, I don't know.
The case of Venezuela,
right?
the case of Venezuela, we've been dealing with it for the last 34 years. As a matter of fact, remember, we kidnapped Hugo Chavez. I don't know if a lot of people know this or not.
That's important to know.
Yeah, we took him out and we sent him back. You know, Hugo Chavez was kidnapped by the Americans back then. It used to be, when I was in Washington, D.C., I was made aware of it used to be a special unit in Fort Belvoir. To those who live in the U.S., you know what I'm talking about. Fort Belvoir is in Washington, special Air Force base and all that. It used to be a classified unit. And that classified unit in it was dealing only with Venezuela at that time. So we've been having our eyes on Venezuela for the last 4 decades.
Yeah.
And this is why you start to realize now with this case of Maduro, it wasn't about Maduro, but of course the resources, the oil. This is why now you're seeing that conversation here paving or sort of pivoting towards Greenland and figuring out what's going to be happening with Greenland. That again has to do with the access to resources there. But in the case of Greenland, is on a different level because there are three key points to that. One of them is defense, the other one oil, and the third one is the shipping lanes. That's why Greenland is important. But again, you think about European France, by the way, just sent its forces to Greenland. But what France is going to do? All Europe is done for anyway. Germany is not gonna.
I don't know. It's got to be a show, right? Like France is like, I'm gonna send.
We want to send our troops to Greenland to do what? To drink wine and eat cheese.
I don't know. I don't know.
It's unfortunate, it's not a laughing matter. But again, that gives you an idea about where the world how much the world has changed. And this is where this new multipolar order that's going to be now reshaping the trajectory for decades to come. This is what I'm saying. I'm giving it about 15 years for the US. The face of America is going to change. And also you see things is going to get very, very, and I'm an optimistic guy, but I can't sugarcoat it when it's the facts that I have to state them as I see the trends moving forward. I'm looking over the horizon and I'm not saying the good stuff. So
I unfortunately am not either, but the first step to changing that is acknowledging that it's happening.
This is the problem, and for us Americans, we're not willing to again not only accept this but acknowledging this in a way that what, we do have the right to peacefully demonstrate, if peacefully.
Of course, I'm a big peace. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that is one of the ideas of that you're going to have to start, because the basic notion the most Americans do not know is they do not know how much power they have. People.
I agree.
People. They don't understand because they don't understand the ins and outs of how things work. So, all right, let's see a question here. If there's any question here.
Also, Ramples
01. An avid supporter of the channel.
I know, and thank you. And I see where you say read my comments. Can you put your comments in one chunk, and then post it right now because I'm looking at the chat right now. So yes, if you can just put them all in one comment and I can read them. Thank you. I appreciate it. I do want to read the comments. Okay.
All right, let's see the first question here. I'm sorry, not this one,
No, it's
but
up
right here from Francis Tango. Good to see you, Francis. Can they free Maduro? I mean, can someone with deep pockets hire someone to free him? No. The idea
Who they
is,
want.
yeah, well, actually, no, because in the case of Hugo Chavez was similar, and we end up sending him back. In the case of Maduro, is slightly different because the popularity of Hugo Chavez was far more stronger than the popularity of Nicolas Maduro. So this is why elements inside the government of Venezuela sort of betray him. So there was a deal between the US government and some elements inside the government. Hugo Chavez was in a different position altogether. And Hugo Chavez had the massive popular support. So that it doesn't mean that Maduro doesn't. It does, but not to the same level. So returning Maduro will only be under one condition, that there will be some deal made between the US government and Maduro himself.
Yeah,
which
that's my
I
take
don't
too.
see how this is going to happen.
Well, I mean, unless they can more or less like rehabilitate him and he's going to be like, well, I was so wrong selling oil in other currencies than in the US dollar. I was so wrong, guys. So wrong.
And
I'm
I
going
don't
to
see
only
him
sell in US dollars from now on.
Yeah, and I don't see him doing that, because remember, Maduro was viewed or perceived as the extension of Hugo Chavez. If he embarks on this, that's a death sentence for him, politically speaking. And I don't see him doing that. And the US is going to be now stuck with embarking on a venture that didn't sort of calculate the consequences of it long term. This is where we're going to be.
The whole thing seemed extremely short-sighted, but I will say this, like, if the real goal is to have, because this move by the United States, it seemed kind of out of nowhere, but we know that this has been going on more or less for like most of the entirety of my life, at least. But this has been going on for a really long time, right?
Yeah.
So, could oh man, could the US not have just built infrastructure?
No.
Could the US not have just invested in that? You know what I'm saying? Like, obviously, we know the US doesn't do that. Want. That's just stupid that the US doesn't do that. But like, this seemed like the most short-sighted, dumbest way to get this particular thing done. Like, is this the only way that the US knows how to do things? And I know the answer because I study history, but I'm just saying there's got to be somebody smart in Washington. Anybody? Is there anybody smart in Washington? Does anybody want to step up and do things better? Anybody? Anybody? I'm just putting the call out there, guys. Washington, D.C. Hey, guys, anybody want to do anything better than all this dumb shit? Anybody? Please step up.
Well, actually, there was if you recall, you had a video with Ross about brainwashing. Do you remember?
Yeah, I see what Matt said.
And also Matt watched. Hi, Matt.
Hey.
Matt usually watch the videos, whatever. And I remember that video. I remember that it was very, very interesting to understand brainwashing.
I'm going to do a course on it. I actually already started doing a course on more or less brainwashing, like how do you brainwash?
Good. That would be very
civilization
for the community to learn.
It'll take me a while to put it together because I'm really I really want to produce something very good quality for you guys, but I'm putting that together because it's important to understand, it's so easy to get caught in the emotions of this stuff because it's so dumb and it's so enraging and there's so much awful stuff going on. It's really, really easy to get caught up in it. And, you know, if you notice everything that's going on right now, so we had the Epstein stuff, right?
Yeah.
That was so enraging. People were so angry about that. And then we have the Somali fraud stuff, and that was super enraging. And now we have Venezuela, which is super emotional and
Yeah.
enraging in a whole bunch of ways. To different sides, different people. Hey, buddy. The dog came to say hi, guys. And so you gotta keep your cool. Even though things are really crazy, you gotta keep your cool and you gotta use your logic. You
Yeah.
gotta use your critical thinking, and you have to think your way through the problem and don't get caught up in the emotion of it.
Indeed. Who is asking here? How is Ross? Ross is doing good. He's busy with
Nice,
his
good.
stuff. He is busy with his own stuff. He has a lot of stuff to do. So it was kind
Mhm.
enough of him to share time with us. All right. Well, I think we covered whatever I don't see any other question. Do you?
I don't know, but there's a lot of stuff in the chat, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But we're
Anyway.
also we're over
Yeah.
time by 15 minutes.
Yeah. We
Also
are.
that.
So, well, anyway, you guys, hope you enjoyed. Remember, FYI, tomorrow I will be talking about Iran. Let me put the link once again in the chat box for those who might want to join me tomorrow. I'll be talking geopolitics tomorrow
Yes.
about what's going on with Iran and the big picture of all that. So,
And also, guys, you are not getting notifications because YouTube is not sending our videos out. So please check back.
why is that? Why is that?
So if we don't do, I don't know, if we don't do what they want, they don't show our videos. It sucks. But I
Oh,
know a lot of you guys are not getting notifications for the videos for
yeah,
this channel. So please show the algorithm we are valuable content, and come
yeah.
and actually like click on the videos, watch them as long as you can, play them in the background. It doesn't even matter. I hope you like the sound of our voices, and hopefully learn something important, because that's what we want to do for you guys. But yes, please just interact with the video as much as possible, because that is how the algorithm will start to like us again, I hope.
And please make sure to subscribe if you have not done so already. So, anyway, we look forward to seeing you next week. We'll figure out some. If you have any ideas as to which topic you would like us to address or cover, just drop us a comment in the comment section there. We'll take a look at it, and we look forward to seeing you next week. All right, you take care, guys. Bye bye.